Welcome back to my Warhammer lore. In today's video we will be delving into the crypts of the Tomb Kings of Camry, or Necromancy if you like, specifically focusing on their culture, possible influences, geography, and how they came to be, essentially their origins. Now before we get too far, I'd like to point out that I am going to be purposefully avoiding certain topics. I have plans of integrating them in the future videos, essentially. So one of these is a detailed history of Camry, and therefore also the Tomb Kings, and I will be fleshing this out similarly to the Dark Elf videos. So essentially you will get the detailed story by the stories of the Tomb King legendary lords and heroes. Also of note is that the Tomb Kings and the vampire counts are extremely interconnected. For that reason, certain details involving vampire count characters will not get the full treatment I prefer to present to you all, but they will be fleshed out in later videos involving the vampire counts primarily. Well, now that our PR statement is done, let's begin with the Tomb Kings as they are. So what are the Tomb Kings? The Tomb Kings are the dead of the ancient civilization of the Necromancy, also known as the Kingdoms of Camry, whom were once a vast and powerful empire that ruled what is now a great portion of the Southlands, and tendrils of their empire even stretched as far as what would now be the lands of the Empire of Sigmar Heldenhammer. Of course, this was a very long time ago, and the story of their creation is one of treachery, ambition, love, and of course power. But that is also a story for another day. For now, what you must understand is that at one point at the height of their ancient civilization, a great sorcerer, well, not quite a sorcerer at this point, but more of a lich, is possibly the first of his kind, and he attempted to exert his will upon the entirety of the Warhammer world with a grand spell that would shake the foundations of history. Nagash the Undying had conquered his ancient homeland and enacted a ritual of biblical proportions. The amount of energy was astounding and forced even the mighty Nagash to recover his strength between incantations. The first part of the ritual killed every living thing for hundreds of miles, creating the land of the dead as we know it, and raising those corpses, and in fact every single corpse that still dwelt in the spell's radius, back to unliving. It is said that the power of this shook the very mountains of the world's edge, and this event may have been one of the final nails in the coffin for the dwarfs, whom suffered greatly as volcanoes and collapses crushed parts of their now splintered empire. The second part of the ritual was going to bind all of these animated corpses to Nagash's will, forming a literal undying horde with which the Necromancer would sweep the world in a tidal wave of death. A world in which Nagash would rule all, and no god or man would be able to stop him. Fortunately, due in part to his own paranoia and the desperation of an unusual rat-like savior, Nagash's second ritual was never started. He was slain by the final priest king of Camry, Alcatizar the Conqueror, and aided by a pure warpstone forged and enchanted sword known as Fellblade. There is of course more to this story, but for our purposes what happened next is the most important aspect of this spell. You see, when a corpse is resurrected through normal use of necromancy in the Warhammer world, it is essentially just a piece of the sorcerer's will, or the actual spell, given shape by the corpse's magic, infusing it. In other words, it is similar to a puppet, a very durable and deadly puppet, depending on the configuration of the flesh and bone, as well as the individual that was resurrected. For instance, the corpses of powerful individuals, such as great warriors or kings, who had a strong will of their own in their previous life, are capable of being given almost a low-level sentience, from which they will be more agile as well as stronger, and capable of recalling their martial prowess as a living fighter, but without the limitations of fatigue or fear of death. These are known as wights, often due to the fact that most of these creatures tend to be old and have bleached white bones under their ancient armor. Of course, keeping these creatures moving is usually a very taxing endeavor for a necromancer, but Nagash is no average necromancer, and the risen dead, for the most part, of this spell were the mindless tendrils of animated life, the puppets. But it appears that unexpectedly, or perhaps through designs, the rulers of Camry, from the kings to the princes and even a few queens, appear to have had their literal souls ripped from the afterlife and placed into their lifeless bodies, creating something rather unique amongst the undead. Of course, they were powerless at first, with Nagash's will keeping them in line, but with the death of the great necromancer, all of the Tomb Kings gained something no other animated corpse can claim. They gained free will. This is what separates the Tomb Kings from the average undead. They are the incarnations of their previous selves, stuffed into the mummified, empty remains of their bodies. The Tomb Kings are the sovereign and undying rulers of Nehekhara. They are all that remains of an ancient and a far-flung civilization that had long ago vanished from history, its people long dead and their cities naught but dried ash and shifting sand. These unliving kings and his personal retinue of warriors and priests are all that remains to remember their passing. Since then, the Tomb Kings have ever reigned from their necropolis as they had always done, attempting to imitate the life that they once knew and loved. Alongside these mighty rulers are their trusted advisors, an ancient caste of religious figures known as the Lich Priests. These wizards of great power were once the keepers of great knowledge and forbidden lore, and the caretakers of Nehekhara's long-past kings and queens. And below them stand the uncountable legions of warriors that serve for all eternity, never tiring nor dying for their unliving master. Upon their first death, the Tomb Kings were embalmed in elaborate ceremonies. Their bodies were wrapped in pitch, soaked bandages, and scrubbed with magical wards meant to preserve their corpses for all eternity. Despite the skills of the Lich Priests, the Tomb Kings now resemble dried skeletal husks. They are, however, possessed of an incredible strength and can withstand injuries that would slay a mortal man outright. The only known way to truly destroy a Tomb King is to set their bones' dry forms ablaze. Revived by the rituals of the Lich Priests, a Tomb King awakens from the sleep of death, possessing all the ambition and lust for power he had in life. Every Tomb King seeks to reclaim his plundered treasures and restore his ancient glory. If this means the subjugation and destruction of a foreign land, then the Tomb King's army, loyal even in death, rises from its rest at his command. Although it is the magic of the Lich Priest that animates the Tomb King's army, it is by the indomitable will of the Tomb King himself that they move and fight. Every Tomb King is an aggressive warlord, able to instill their warriors with their own unyielding vigor. A powerful curse hangs over the mummified royalty of Nehekhara, striking down those who seek to do them wrong. Tales abound of tomb robbers dropping dead as their blood magically turns into sand, or they're engulfed in a ravenous swarm of desert locusts that strip flesh from bone. The most horrible fates are reserved for those that dare strike down these ancient lords in combat. Those who would willingly and foolishly bring about such a demise, they are truly damned. Of course, the demise in question is that of being turned into sand, which sounds relatively horrible. And many Tomb Kings behave as if nothing is actually wrong, ruling as if they were still beings of flesh and blood. Perhaps some are actually truly unaware of their unliving state, while others are in denial of their cursed existence, or have been driven completely mad by the sight of their own reflection. A Tomb King may demand a bowl of sweet figs and a goblet of fine wine, seemingly oblivious that the contents of such a meal would spill through their desiccated bodies onto the floor. When the for-two meal arrives, a Tomb King will simply stare at the fruit, wondering what such a thing is for, until it either rots or vestigial memory surfaces, allowing a moment of clarity to reassert itself. In that instant, the Tomb King recalls all of the pride, majesty, and greatness of what he was, and the cruel parody of what he has become. Realizing that he will never know the taste of food, the quenching relief of cool water, the sensation of touch, or any other simple joy ever again, the Tomb King will enter a fit of incandescent rage, ancient and wrathful. All that is left for the Tomb King is their hunger for power, their thirst for conquest, and their need for vengeance. The Tomb Kings are unremitting in their eternal war upon those who have the temerity to live, whilst their rightful rulers languish in undeath. They have become an abomination to nature and an affront to death itself. Well, I have been rambling for quite a while at this point about the Tomb Kings and what makes them special as far as undead are concerned, so I hope you have a good understanding of what the Tomb Kings are, but let's take a look at their actual society now. In the beginning, the Nehekharans are said to have actually dwelt in the jungles of the Southlands, but were destined for the deserts of Camry. According to myths and legends, the Nehekharans, in the time before men, gods walked amongst the worlds of mortals. It was believed by the ancient Nehekharans that when the desert gods first arrived in the great land, they fought the armies of the vile demons and foul spirits that lurked there in great battles that lasted for many centuries. In numerous inscriptions carved on the tombs and monuments of ancient cities, it is written that Petra, the sun god and king of the Nehekharan pantheon, led the final battle against the dark powers. Riding a resplendent golden chariot, he drove the darkness back. Even the most powerful demon recoiled from the touch of his divine light. Petra and the desert gods were victorious, and the evil ones retreated north to escape destruction. Legends tell that the desert gods then transformed the land into a verdant realm and ruled there for thousands of years until the birth of the race of man. It is said that these people were so favored by the heavens that Petra himself bestowed upon them the fertile land that would later be called Nehekhara, in exchange for their worship. The deities offered to protect and watch over those that dwelt within the great land. With the covenant made, the gods nurtured the people of the nomadic tribes, teaching them how to read, write, and build great cities. Thus were the Nehekharan civilizations born. It is important to note that this is where we begin to see some of the influence of the lizardmen and possibly the old ones in Nehekharan culture, as the sun god Petra seems very similar to Chotek of the lizardmen pantheon, and of course the battle with the dark powers are almost certainly the demons and spawn of chaos. Of course, this is not the only obvious influence, but one of the few that I feel has a very concrete connection between the two factions. Now, the first king to unite Camry under one rule was Settra the Great, or Terrible, depending on how you view him. Now, Settra will be getting his own video, but let's just say that he conquered the other kingdoms and consolidated their resources, further expanding the lands of Nehekhara. In this way, the kingdoms of Camry spread far and wide in this ancient time. He also, in a grand display of faith and devotion to the gods, sacrificed his children in a great ritual on the day of his coronation, which resulted in the river Vitae flowing once again for the first time in several decades. He took the title of Priest King, which is now the current title for all of the various rulers of Camry. Of course, despite Settra being such a great and inspirational figure for his people, he was but a man, and like all men, he would get old and eventually die. And Settra did not think that this was fair, so he established what is now known as the Mortuary Cult, which is essentially a priesthood devoted to the pursuit of eternal life. Now, I will also be doing a full video on the Mortuary Cult, so let's move on from there. Ever since mighty Settra embarked upon his impossible quest for gaining true immortality for all time, the entire social order of Nehekhara became preoccupied with the very nature of death and the afterlife. When the Mortuary Cult was first formed under the orders of Settra and went about the task of finding immortality, the cult's influence eventually seeped into Nehekharan society. These ancient priests were of many talents and professions. They were holy men, alchemists, apothecaries, demonologists, and much more. When Settra finally died, the rulers of Nehekhara, blinded by their pride and united by their now culturally predispositioned horror of death, turned their attention ever more to their lives after death, even at the expense of their own lives and that of their loyal subjects. In mimicry of Settra's own great burial, the kings and princes of Nehekhara ordered magnificent necropolises and mighty pyramids to be built to store their souls until the time came when they will be reborn into their new and unending earthbound lives. More often than not, the husbands, wives, and servants of the dead kings and princes were either slain and mummified or else just buried alive with them when they died, along with the ruler's worldly possessions and war machines. For the greatest kings, entire phalanxes of his most loyal guard sometimes drank poison so as to join their lord even in death and stand guard over him until resurrected. The practice of mummification and tomb building spread down throughout this society until everyone who could afford it spent much of their worldly wealth preparing for their own afterlife. The priests of the Mortuary Cult grew to eclipse all other religions and cults within the entire land of Nehekhara, elevating their authority and position over all of the Nehekharan society. Soon in the deserts beyond each city stood sprawling necropolises, veritable cities of the dead, and as the years passed, these cities became larger and more numerous than the great settlements of the actual living. So it was that death became the defining nature of this ancient human kingdom. It is also of note that the idea of mummification and even the building of grand pyramids was possibly borrowed from the lizardmen, as we know that they do have dealings, or at least had at one point dealings with the lizardmen, and are known to embalm the slain upon their death, and are even capable of binding the souls of the dead slain into these mummified remains. Lord Croak would be a good example of this. Now, I'm not saying that the lizardmen taught the Camrians how to do this, but it is suspicious that their neighbors to the south have a very similar architecture and practice of embalming and preserving their sacred dead, and the Nehekharans didn't at least borrow these ideas from what they could have seen in the jungles. I will say this, at this point in time, that Nagash is actually alive in Camry. Raestra, one of the greatest kingdoms to the east and south, bordering the jungles, actually has an active war going against the Lizardmen, so it is easy to assume that the modern Tomb Kings would have much of the same diplomacy towards the children of the old ones. But I guess that point I'm trying to make is that it is obvious to me that there are a great deal of Lizardmen cultural influences in Nehekaran society than what may appear on the initial surface. As far as a societal structure is concerned, Nehekara is very similar to an ancient civilization of our own world. You have the kings and royalty at the top of the de facto pyramid, followed by the clergy, which is important to note is not only the mortuary cult, but the priests of the many other gods of the Cambrian pantheon. In fact, there was even a holy city run by all of the priests of these various factions, before Nagash's first rise to power, of course. For more information on the deities of the Tomb King Pantheon, please see my Tomb King Pantheon video. And then after the clergy, you have the soldiers, of course, the guard, and then after them you have the merchants and traders, which could amass an actual great wealth through forging weapons, breeding war horses, building chariots, or possibly trading spices and silks from the far east of Cathay, which appears to have an extremely close tie to Lamia, one of the great Cambrian cities, famous for its ports and bazaars and vampires. Now, we are not getting into the vampire count, so let's move on. So, of course, under the merchants and traders, you have the working class, which in such an advanced society is actually very skilled artisans, which would rival many of the current empires of men to this day, as their buildings are still standing after thousands of years, and their pottery is quite eloquent. Finally, you do have slaves, which could range from criminals to deserters to bandits or spoils of war, or even trade. Now, in this form, I'm talking about Cathayan concubines, which have found their way into the luxurious estates of many of the Lamian noble families. Now, that's about all we've got for the societal aspect of Nehekara and the Tomb Kings by proxy. Of course, in the modern Tomb Kings iteration, there are no more slaves. Well, there are slaves still. There technically are slaves that row boats indefinitely, but for the most part there's no more merchants, there's no traders, there's only warriors, kings, priests, and the occasional slaves that essentially just row boats is all that they do. Now let's get into the actual geography of Nehekara. And Nehekara is a hostile realm where the searing heat of the desert sun is the least of a wandering traveler's worries. The waters of the Great Mortis River are poisonous and blood-colored, providing no relief to the thirsty. Of course, during the time before Nagash, this river was known as the River Vitae, and essentially the Nile River equivalent of our own world. Now, he did have it poisoned, and forevermore it's been known as the River Mortis. There are regions of quicksand that can swallow regiments whole, and choking sandstorms that strip the flesh from bones in mere seconds. Whirlwinds of dust, skulls, and ravenous desert insects scour through the land, and rivers of flesh-eating beetles crawl across the desert, consuming everything in their path. There are vast plains of bones and skulls that come to life without warning, skeletal fingers reaching up to drag anything alive on the surface into a sandy grave below. A few oases still exist, scattered throughout the desert, but they are all tainted. Instead of fresh water, they are filled with bubbling pools of blood. Most are the abodes of foul monsters, and those that are not lined with parched, malevolent trees that strangle their victims and suck every drop of moisture from their bodies. Nehekara is a wilderness of ever-shifting sands, a land of constantly changing topography. There are waterfalls of sand that defy the passage of time and flow backwards. There exist dunes and basins large enough to accommodate entire armies, and many of the Tomb King's legions lie beneath the surface in such places, awaiting the magical incantations of list priests to awaken them from their deathly slumber. A sandstorm might unearth a monolithic statue or even an entire buried city, lost and forgotten under the dunes, only to be engulfed and concealed again a few days later. Such hidden places are said to include the mysterious city of Bronze, a complex rumored to be covered in glyphs carved by beings older than Nehekara itself. In addition to open deserts where sand stretches as far as the eye can see, there are vast necropolises and numerous places where one can hardly move for all of the statues and sculptures, each covered with grisly images of death. These monuments are vaster and grander than anything the old world can boast, and foremost amongst them are towering figures resembling the great kings and angry gods of Nehekhara. Fearsome statues that come to life and smite trespassers with impunity. Now, when the Tomb Kings awoke, they ordered their undead minions to actually rebuild the cities of old and fill them with markets, wares, boats, and other things that they remembered from life. As few trees grow in the land of the dead, many of these things are fashioned from stone, gold, or fused bones. Skeletal men walk the lands, fulfilling seemingly pointless jobs such as fetching stagnant water, harvesting crops launched as withered, or else rowing barges across the great Mortis River. Armies of skeletons are forever patrolling the borders of their realm as they did in life, relentlessly striding across the arid landscape in search of enemies and intruders. Numerous undead creatures wander the deep desert, from swarms of small but deadly desert scorpions to giant centipedes, each the size of sphinx. Great flocks of carrion circle high above, and packs of ravenous sand sharks swim beneath the surface of the dunes. In the centuries since Nagash's great ritual, many foul monsters have been drawn to the magically tainted realm. There are now manticores, cockatrices, and even dragons inhabiting the Hekaran desert. Nomadic bands make a living by plundering the tombs of ancient kings, and marauding orc tribes continuously rampage across the land of the dead in search of battle and plunder. Nehekhara may be a barren realm, but is far from empty, or at the very least, uninhabited. And that gives us a much better look at the current society of the Tomb Kings, as well as some ideas about the topography of the current land of Nehekhara. And of course, it didn't always look like this. This is the aftermath of Nagash's spell. The river was not always made of blood and poisoned, It was actually fruitful at one point. Now, let's move on to the actual city-states of the major de facto kingdoms before they were united of Camry. And we might as well start off with the actual city of Camry. The City of Kings is the jewel in the crown of Nehekhara. It is the oldest, largest, proudest, and most powerful of all the ancient cities. The monuments built in this grand necropolis are vast and majestic to behold, crafted by the most skilled necrotechs in the land. Graven images of gods and monsters peer down from every rooftop, and statuary marks the corner of every dust-scattered street. Throughout Nehekhara's long history, the greatest of all the kings for those of Camry, it became established early on that whoever ruled the City of Kings was the mightiest sovereign in all the great land, he to whom the other kings would pledge allegiance and offer their tribute. In the heart of Camry lies the lavish royal palace, in which Cetra the Imperishable sits upon a throne made of gold, soul diamonds, and a wealth of other gemstones worth more than the combined treasures of a dozen lesser kings. Besides this court of power looms one of the most magnificent structures ever created by mankind, Cetra's Great Pyramid. Within this ivory edifice, Nehekhara's fearsome legions await the king's command, standing ready to march to war and destroy his enemies. However, even this majestic monument, rising hundreds of times the height of a man, is dwarfed by the great Black Pyramid of Nagash. A wonder and a terror to all those who behold it, lying silent and ominous on the outskirts of Camry. For most of Nehekhara's existence, Camry was the capital. Of course, you could make the point that after Nagash was banished the first time, that Lamia became the capital, but for our purposes, it is easier to say that Camry is the main capital of the current Tomb Kings. And the next city is the great establishment of Zandri, the fleet port of Terror. It is one of the largest and greatest port cities within Nehekhara and commands the waters of the Great Mortis Delta. The Tomb King's domain is not limited to the endless sands. They also bring war to the seas. The coast around the Mortis Delta is filled with the sunken wrecks of numerous pirate ships, fools that have attacked Zandri in search of untold riches. In the city's harbors, at the mouth of the great River Mortis, ancient barges that writhe with dark energy still float, manned by skeleton crews who bend their backs at the oars to the resonant boom of drums and the cracks of their taskmasters' whips. Along the waters of the miles-wide Mortis River and across the great ocean to the north, the tomb fleets bring the terror of Nehekhara to distant realms. These imposing armadas set out laden with skeletal legions and vengeful rulers thirsty for conquest, and return with blood-slick weapons and recovered treasures, plundered from Nehekhara in ages past. One of Zandri's greatest rulers was King Amenhotep. I think I'm saying that right. During his reign, he built a vast fleet of warships and sailed the oceans of the Old World, conquering the lands across the seas in the name of Ulaltep, the vulture god. His kingdom extended deep into the lands of Tilia, and under his rule, Xandri became a fabulous and wealthy place. Now, the city is all but destroyed, and the streets are quiet, but the seas still stir with unnatural life. When Nagash awoke the Tomb Kings, they waged war on each other, and death, as they had in life. Amenhotep was content to be the ruler of only the oceans. Ancient vessels, still as glorious as they were when the king still lived, plied the waters once more. Even in death, it is said that he continues to raid the world, his ships ceaselessly sailing the seas, rowed by skeleton slaves, doomed to an eternity at the oars. No coast is safe, and even the most experienced captains knows to steer clear when they sight his fleet. It is important to note that Xandri is on the western fringe of Nehekhara, and shares the same ocean with Tilia and Estalia. It has also been known to occur that the Dark Elves and Tomb Kings will occasionally undergo a kind of non-aggression pact when raiding the same areas at the same time. Of course, this has only happened a few times when raiding the coast of Tilia specifically, and I'm certainly not implying that the Tomb Kings would ever actually partner with the Dark Elves, but when on the hunt for certain stolen relics or pursuing some conceived slight to the Tomb Kings, they are willing to not slaughter the Dark Elves until after they have achieved their goals, at which point the Dark Elves had better be gone, or they will inevitably meet the same cruel fate as the people they were just raiding. The next city is Maas, which is a very special city, not just because of its location on the River Mortis or its proximity to Camry. Maas was also known as the Scarab City. It is one of the few cities within Nehekhara that still bears the living within its walls. It was built originally before the time of Setra, thousands of years ago by King Kahasek. This dates as it is one of the first human cities ever to be built. It is located near Camry, further up the Great River Mortis towards its source. It was originally built due to its proximity to the very fertile lands just south of the Great Mortis River and north of the Ash River. This location encouraged its foundation, and its people were fed aplenty. Setra during his reign conquered Maas and forged it to pay him tribute. As soon as Setra died, however, it rebelled against the grip of its former master and succeeded in gaining freedom. Until the time of Nagash, it was conquered and reconquered by Camry, but could never actually be held. Then when Nagash took hold of Camry, an alliance of the city of Maas, Xandri, Maja Rock, Beerus, and Setra fought together to free the land from his tyranny. The king of Lamia, King Lamizar, led his alliance, but eventually the allied cities fractured and fought against each other, once again seeking the other's wealth. Later in the 6th dynasty, under King Alcazar I, Maas was conquered by Camry again. Now, from then on, it remained a part of the kingdom of Nehekhara forever. After the Awakening, the Tomb Kings of Maas fought against themselves to regain the city. There was no peace in Maas until Setra had awoken, and upon taking control, sent all the lesser kings back to their tombs to await his call. Sometimes afterwards, a nomadic tribe called the Scythians, or Scythians maybe, came upon the city and saw Prince Tutuanquat of Maas as a manifestation of their deity. In reverence, the nomads pledged themselves to the prince, tending to the crops which feed their people, and in return, Prince Tutanquanat now rules over a living city which he guards ferociously. Such is their devotion to Tutanquanat that they often fight in the service, and should one of their numbers die, their body will be ritually picked over by vultures and their bones taken to the necropolis so that they may serve their god for all eternity. Very interesting, because normally you wouldn't expect to see any living souls in the land of the dead. It is very unusual indeed for humans to coexist with the undead in such the way that as this is, as they are essentially protected. They don't even fear the undead, and they embrace them in a way that is very unique in the Warhammer world. The next city is Maja Rock, once known as the City of Hope, but now known as the City of Decay. It is one of the ancient city-states of Nehekhara, built on the eastern entrance to the Charnel Valley. Maja Rock was once one of the greatest obstacles to Setra's dreams of world domination. Being quite close to the end of the valley, the armies of Maja Rock have been known to use the valley to set up devastating ambushes against would-be Western invaders. This proved especially effective during the reign of King Far, who almost single-handedly held back Setra's invasion by ambushing him in the canyon valley. Only when the old king died did Citra finally take the city. When the Great Awakening happened, King Far was one of the greatest of the kings to rise from the grave, and his rage at seeing his city surrender to his hated rival saw him kill off many of his descendants. He would later take on a campaign to eradicate the local greenskin population, wielding the flail of gods as he did so. Maja Rock, also in the time before Nagash, was a city for priests, and was kind of a sacred mecca for the faithful to pilgrimage to. It is also the place in which Nagash was held in place by the priests of the Tomb King pantheon, and defeated for the first time and driven from Nehekhara. During this time, great temples devoted to all the gods filled the city, and it was seen as a place where rival priest kings could meet on equal terms to discuss treaties and peace agreements. And next we have Qatar, known as the Palace of Corpses. It is one of the ancient city-states of ancient Nehekhara. Just as the city-state of Maja Rock acts as the gateway to the east, Qatar was built upon the western entrance to the Charnel Valley, known also as the Valley of Kings. The city literally being carved to the very walls of the canyon pass, great pillars carved from the valley rock face line in the hundreds of steps and lead to the palace gates. It is said that a powerful priest has taken residence in the palace, and he has learned the secret of bringing the great statues which line the canyon back to life. As it mentions, the city of Qatar is more of a heavily fortified obstruction to enter the valley that connects the western half of Nehekhara to the eastern half of the empire. Essentially a checkpoint anyone must overtake if they want to cross over to the other side of the empire. And of course, on the other side of the valley, then you have to deal with Maja Rock, which leads to extreme attrition for living armies. Next we have Bagar. In ancient times, the people of Bagar were part of the nomadic desert tribes of the Great Desert that are the ancestors of the modern Arabians. Originally bandits that preyed on Nehekharan caravans, they were conquered by Citra, civilized and incorporated into the Great Land. The people of Bagar were horsemen first and foremost, with cavalry being a vital part of their military forces. Bagar became rich and prosperous through trade, since it held the only real roadway leading to the lands far to the south along the Gulf of Medes. Their main god was Kasar, the faceless god of the desert winds. When Bagar resisted the rule of Nagash from Camry, Arkan the Black led a punitive expedition that enslaved most of the Bagarites, killed nearly all of their prized horses, and caused hundreds of refugees to seek shelter in other cities, spreading the word of Nagash's crimes. Now, I would like to note that this is the original Arkan the Black, back when he still had flesh and was not a complete walking skeleton. The next city is Kasimir, the Temple of Sorrow. It is one of the major city-states of ancient Nehekhara, hidden amongst the dunes. It is said to be covered in glyphs carved by beings older than Nehekhara itself. Before the ritual of Nagash, Kasimir was known as the City of Bronze, so called for being the center of mining and smithing in Nehekhara. The people of Kasimir were known for their great size of nearly 7 feet tall, and its warriors' hard skin was enough that arrows shattered against it. Now, these warriors were assembled into the formidable Legion of Bronze, led by the lion-bodied Ushapti of Geheb. Kasimir was one of the first cities to oppose Nagash, fighting under the leadership of King Ahakmenhotep. Despite several major engagements and near victories, Ahakmenhotep's forces were ultimately betrayed by his brother Mehmet, and he was the current Grand Hierophant of Kasimir, and was subsequently destroyed by Arkan the Black. Mehmet would rule Kasimir in Nagash's name until the victorious armies of the United Nehekharan campaign destroyed the last of the Necromancer's immortals, though by that time the city had suffered for decades and was all but ruined. Some of the greatest warriors of the Camrian military came from Kasimir. Indeed, it was no coincidence that Nagash targeted Kasimir first during his original conquest of Nehekhara, and though they fought valiantly, they were ultimately broken and never quite recovered, at least until the rise of the Tomb Kings. The next city is Liberus, the tomb city of Asaph. Known by other titles such as Liberus the Magnificent or Liberus which guards the sea, it is one of the several powerful city-states of ancient Nehekhara. Though smaller than her other sister cities, Liberus is no less a vision of decayed splendor, which signified the wealth and beauty of ancient Nehekhara. Vast temple complexes towered into the sky, and even burial pyramids is topped with priceless gold. Beerus is the ancient resting place of High Queen Khalida, renowned warrior queen whose enchanting beauty, martial pride, and her deep-rooted hatred of Nagash's tainted race of vampires dwells. Before Nehekhara became the land of the dead, Beerus was known as the patron city of Tahath, and home of many technological wonders. During the war against Nagash, the priest kings of Beerus, Hekmenkuep was responsible for several astounding war machines, including skyships, advanced catapults, and steam-powered tomb scorpions and colossus made of wood and bronze. By the time that Khalida ruled as queen, they had learned how to both mine and utilize iron to arm and armor their soldiers, as opposed to bronze. Ever since Khalida's short reign as queen of Beerus and her eventually resurrection by Asaf, goddess of vengeance and serpents, the city has since taken this goddess as their personal patron deity. Carvings of her beloved asps adorn every surface of the city's funeral monuments, and the serpentine engravings constantly writhe across the stonework, hissing at any who walk in their shadow and spying on any who dare explore the streets. Of all Nehekharan cities, Beerus has the most independence from Camry's rule, and that of Settra himself. This is due in no small part to its distance and isolation from Settra's court. Beerus is surrounded on three sides by the mountain range known as the Devil's Backbone to the west, the Cursed Jungles to the south, and the sulfuric waters of the Gulf of Fear to the east. The only negotiable path lies to the north, past the tainted ruins of Lamia, where the spirits of the damned lurk and feed upon any who enter. It is also important to note that Beerus was simply a city of scholars before Queen Khalida's rule. She is the one who militarized the city, so to speak, and was very beloved by her people, which after her death, due to a duel with her cousin, the Queen of Lamia, at the time, was forced to a rather bitter rivalry with the other Nehekharan city. And the next and final city is that of Lamia. The first mention of the City of Dawn is in Settra's reign, paying tribute to the first priest king of Camry. Later on, during the Second Dynasty, Lamia was subjected to the king Raheksh and Rahkef II, being conquered by Katep along with the rest of the Nehekhara, but over time eventually it became the second most powerful city in Nehekhara, only behind Camry. It was during this time of greater apogee when Lahamasheptra, the fourth of Lamia, led a coalition of 7 cities of Nehekhara against Nagash, but was killed by the usurper. However, his son Lamashizar took control of his armies of Nehekhara and defeated the armies of Nagash, marching to the Black Pyramid to destroy all knowledge of the usurper. However, not all of this knowledge was destroyed. Lamashizar managed to take one of those volumes, captured Arkan the Black, and took both of these secretly to the city of Lamia. Once there, he tried to study the grimoire cursed to eternal life, but Neferata, his sister, took control of the situation, and with the help of Arkan, managed to distill the elixir of life, which turned the first vampire. Knowing that alone she was vulnerable, she watered the magical elixir to several noblemen of Lamia, founding a vampiric kingdom in and of itself. It was also at this time that Neferata murdered her cousin, Queen Khalida, Nefereth of Beerus, to defend her secret. Over time, vampires founded the Temple of Blood, where gods ruled over the terrified inhabitants of Lamia and committed all sorts of excess. One of the vampires, Abarash, warned of the dangers of attacking other kingdoms in search of prey, but despite their warnings, the rest continued hunting in other realms in search of human blood. This made the presence of vampires in the city finally discovered, and the existence was due to the knowledge of Nagash, and the rulers of Maas, Zandri, and Raisetra rose against Lamia, now known as Lamia the Cursed. For months, the vampires with Abarash in command could contain the host of the vindictive kings of Nehekhara. However, the vast armies of Nehekhara ended up beating the vampires. The Camrian soldiers entered the city and all structures were demolished and set afire. Destroyed buildings like the Library of the Great Temple of Blood, and the entire population was enslaved. Many vampires died during the sacking of the city, but the oldest and most powerful vampires, such as Neferata, Abarash, Ushoran, Wusoran, and others managed to escape the doomed city and join Nagash, except Abarash, he wasn't there. After the defeat of Nagash at the hands of Al-Khadizar, the rest of the vampires fled to escape the wrath of the great Necromancer and founded their own clans. Neferata created her own clan, composed almost exclusively of women, whom were then called Lamians in honor of this ancient city. Currently, the city is completely in ruins, and Neferata is gathering forces to drive back the Tomb Kings in the region, reconquer the city, claim the throne, and rebuild the Temple of Blood. And that is it for the geography of Nehekhara as a whole. And now I want to cover two small lore points. The first being the written language of the Nehekharan tongue, which follows a highly organized and logical, if not complex, grammatical structure. Their spoken language is just called High Nehekharan. It's an almost long-forgotten dialect that is only spoken by reanimated Tomb Kings. The Nehekharan written language, which are known as hieroglyphs, uses a series of carved or drawn images which are meant to represent orbs or objects within a sentence. A combination of such glyphs are then used together to form complete sentences. Most of the glyphs are often written within the walls and stone faces of many obelisks and temples. Since the lands of Nehekhara was considered the cradle of human civilization, it can be said that Nehekharans were the first to produce the first human written language upon ancient papyrus, long before the rise of the Empire of Man or even the Tilean city-states. According to Nehekharan legend, it is said that the desert gods of that land were the ones responsible for teaching those early Nehekharans how to read and write, thus allowing them to become the most powerful nation they would one day become. And obviously it has a heavily Egyptian influence. I mean, it's damn near verbatim hieroglyphs and whatnot. And now let's move into the procreation aspect. Now, it should be obvious that the Tomb Kings do not reproduce. They are undead after all, but another defining characteristic of these undead is that after a battle, as long as the bodies are not burned or crushed to dust essentially, any fallen warrior or even the Tomb Kings themselves can be resurrected by the Lich Priests, instantly replenishing their ranks, but they cannot raise more soldiers as they have a finite amount of dead Nehekharans. Of course, this is a ridiculous amount of undead to begin with. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of years of dead that are possibly embalmed at this point and able to be resurrected. But it is still a finite amount, so Tomb King soldiers are actually a rather cherished commodity, as they cannot be replaced, unlike the constructs that the Tomb Kings seem to employ in battle, which would be, although prized, would not be as prized as actual soldiers. And with that final tidbit, I am ending this lore video on the Tomb Kings of Camry. Now, before you go, I do have more lore on the way, so be expecting that. And I would like to say thank you to all of you watching this video. Your support means so much to me and has kept me producing lore videos for your viewing pleasure. I love talking about Warhammer, and making these videos gives me an excuse to do what I like, so in the long run, thank you, of course. Now, if you are new to the channel and you found this content interesting, make sure to like and subscribe to both keep up with the channel and all future content I do produce. And by liking, it does actually help this video get seen by more people, so it does propagate the video, so spreading the love as it is, and it also keeps you in touch with all other content I'm doing, which I do several video game Let's Play series if you're interested in those. So, now today, if I did get something wrong or left something out, go ahead and leave it down in the comment section, and I will do my best to either answer any questions or discrepancies that I might have had in the video. And if there is something new brought forward, I do tend to add them into future videos I have, as long as I have the material to add them and I think it's accurate. So, as always, I have been Jumbo Thick. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Have a good day.